All right, joining us for this episode is a man who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and give him one anyway. The author of the legendary work of naval aviation fiction, Flight of the Intruder, as well as dozens of other works of fact and fiction. My longtime good friend, hunting and writing mentor, Mr. Stephen Coonts.
Good to see you, Ward.
So let's go back to the beginning. What was your path from your young life to naval aviation?
I went to West Virginia University and they had Air Force ROTC, but the Navy had a little program called AVROC, Aviation Reserve Officer Candidate. And if you signed up for that, they would send you to AOCS in the summers between your sophomore and junior and senior year. And assuming you could still pass the physical and graduated from college, they guaranteed they would send you to flight school. That was the only guaranteed flight school in the American military. And so I thought that sounded like a good idea. I could at least come out of it with a commercial pilot's license and get a job outside of West Virginia. So I wouldn't have to be a coal miner.
So did you already have some aviation experience at that point?
None, zero.
So this is during the Vietnam War. So a lot of people forget that the options were finite for a guy in your situation during those years.
That's correct. Of course, you can always, so many people did go into the military and they found a way to avoid combat. But what I really wanted to do was to learn how to fly an airplane and at government expense. And it worked out pretty well for me. A lot of people found they didn't want the program because it was too tough to pass, and it was and emotionally and physically exhausting. And flight school was certainly no picnic, as you know. And so I was told that of the kids that signed up for AVROC, only 3% managed to get their wings.
So you went through Pensacola, and then where did you do advanced?
Well, I did advanced in Texas, Kingsville, Texas, VT-23, and we were still flying the old F9 then. It wasn't until a year or two later that they went to the TA-4s. From there, I got lucky. I got orders to A-6s. I asked for the West Coast, and I asked for attack, and I got A-6s. I had sort of had my heart set on A-7s. I thought, why should I haul my grandmother around in the back seat? Then, of course, when I got into combat, I found out that grandmother keeps you alive. Bombardier navigators, naval flight officers were really pros, and we became teams. I went to the West Coast track. That'd be VA-128 A6s. And then from there, they walked me across the hangar to attack Squadron 196, which was on the beach for almost a year before we did our couple of combat cruises, the last two cruises that Enterprise did in the Vietnam War.
Highlights of those two cruises in terms of combat sorties?
Yeah, well, obviously the first one was 71, 72, and we were still bombing down in Laos in South Vietnam. They were not going up north due to President Johnson's dictate. Then when I got back 4 months later, of course, in May of 72, they mined the harbors, and Nixon realized that only military victory was going to get us out of Vietnam, and we weren't going to talk our way out with the North Vietnamese. So the second cruise, we were all up north, and with occasional sorties to Laos. But we did a lot of stuff up north, alpha strikes in the daytime, and single plane low levels at night.
Any SAMs fired your way, AAA?
Yeah, I recall at least 4 SAMs that came my way, and AAA on every mission. It was just, North Vietnam was the most heavily defended place on Earth at that time. The A-6 was designed as a low-level attack bomber, and so we were under 500 feet at night and going as fast as we could go with a load of bombs. That made it really tough for the BN because the grazing angles were so low, they had trouble picking out targets. And so they got better at it as we got more experienced. But you could get yourself lost over North Vietnam if you weren't really careful. And that's how I'm sure a lot of A6s were lost. They hit hills at night.
Did your air wing have any losses, any POWs?
We had lost one A-6 on the so-called Christmas bombing. Our XO, Gordon Nakagawa, and my roommate, uh, Kenny Higdon, who was a BN, they got shot down in December and both captured. They were right near Haiphong. They were going in against the SAM site at night. And you remember the A6s were targeted against the SAM sites that were going to shoot at the B-52s. So you had a hard target time for that SAM site just before the B-52s came over, and so they got bagged on that mission, and it was AAA. It was a flak and got them, and they got captured immediately. But they came out in February when the crews were released.
So what happens in the ready room when you lose squadron mates like that, either captured or killed?
Well, we certainly didn't know that they were okay, and so it's a downer, believe me. And Kenny Higdon was my roommate, and I had to pack up all his stuff, and that was even worse of a downer. And he wasn't a neatnik, so I had to fold everything, put it in steel cruise boxes. You don't know if he's alive or dead, if his parents or wife is gonna, what are they gonna think when they open this box? It was You had to do some growing up right then.
Yeah, absolutely. So over the course of these deployments, some of the themes were emerging that manifest themselves in your writing later. So what was the general attitude towards the war that grew increasingly controversial as it went along in the ready room?
Well, I don't think that the aviators were really involved in the right or wrongs of it. We were doing a job, and I think every one of them was a volunteer. They don't order people to fly combat missions; they're all volunteers, and I certainly was. I think the average guy realized that the war had been politically mishandled from end to end, and I think there was some guys were getting blowback from their wives who were at home and had to take all the political guff, and so it was an interesting time. We did have one young pilot that, as I recall, turned in his wings and was instantly converted to aviation maintenance, and he stayed right there, but he wasn't going home. But he wasn't out there dropping bombs, and the problem with all that, of course, is that the missions he didn't fly, somebody else had to fly.
I guess that was part of the cautionary tale for those who might be thinking of doing the same.
Yeah,
It's like, hey, you'll just be on
I
the other
bug
side
out
of
on
the desk there.
my shipmates, and I'll let them down. They have to fly more missions.
Yeah, and you have to face the indignity of that,
Yeah.
for the balance of that deployment. One of the themes of the debut novel is your protagonist is faced with a matrix about how the missions are coming down from higher above. So, was there any dissatisfaction, frustration about how you guys were getting the missions?
Well, I thought there was, and I know I was frustrated. You go in at night at 400 feet and fly through all the flak, and you're bombing a spot in the forest where the intelligence people say that might be a truck park. Well, it might be just a bunch of trees. You're making toothpicks out of big trees, and and at some point you have to ask yourself, is this target really a worthwhile military target? And some of them you say no, and then you could get diverted down to Laos, and they had free fire zones down there, which meant that there wasn't even a target. You were just in a certain area, and you pickled your bombs off hot, and so you were going all that way and doing the night carrier landings, and the tremendous cost in blood and treasure to fly those missions, and you wondered what the military payoff was. And in a lot of cases, I didn't think there was one. And so I tried to capture that in Flight of the Intruder. And obviously, I'm not Jake Grafton. I never did what he did. He stayed in the Navy and I didn't. I did 9 years of active duty and then 12 in reserve. Jake's was a vehicle to tell the story. I thought I had all these flying stories that I wanted to tell. What I really wanted to do was to put you in an A-6 and take you flying. It was a high-tech airplane, as complex a war machine as America possessed at the time. And I wanted to take you flying and let you find out what naval aviation was all about at the gun muzzle. I had all these flying stories that I dreamed up, but I didn't have a plot. And finally, I thought up this plot of the pilot that tries too hard. Pretty simple plot, but I could hang all my flying stories on it. And I was going through a divorce at that time, and so I had oodles of time and absolutely no money. So I just stayed at work and write in the evenings until about 11 o'clock and catch the last bus home. And come in nights or weekends and holidays, work on the story. And after 5 months, I had a manuscript. Then I thought nobody will ever publish this. But I had a friend read it, and he said, well, you got a few plot holes. And so I spent 2 months more working on it. And then I started, sending it out to everybody in the publishing game. They published then, I don't know whether they still do, a book, an annual book called Writer's Marketplace. And it listed every publisher in America and what they published and how you made a submission. I had 32 rejections when I saw The Hunt for Red October in a bookstore. Thought, well, the Naval Institute did this submarine tale. I'll see if they're interested in this flying story. And much to my amazement, a month later, they called me and said, we want to publish it. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. And so, I tell people that's like winning the Irish sweepstakes. That year, 1986, there was only one first novel on the New York Times bestseller list, and that was Flight of the Intruder. Anybody that quits a day job and says, I'm going to go home and write a bestseller and get rich, they're crazy. Some people ask, 32 rejections, didn't you get discouraged? Well, no, I didn't think it'd ever be published. So it was going about the way I thought it would.
So when people tell me in passing that they meant to write a novel or they were going to write a novel, I always ask them, so what do you read?
Exactly. I do the same thing.
You don't just come out of nowhere and decide that this is a craft that you even want to try. But what were your influences that got you to that point?
Ernie Gahn, I thought, was the best aviation writer I'd ever read. His whole gig was to put you in the cockpit. He had been a commercial pilot from the 30s on and flew airlift command during World War II. Then got into writing. He wrote Fate is the Hunter, The High and the Mighty. He could put you in the cockpit, and that's what I wanted to do. And the question was, how does he do it? And so I'd look at Ernie Gahn's stuff, especially Fate is the Hunter.
You Catch Lightning, New York Times bestseller, all formats, multiple languages. At what point did the idea for the movie happen?
The Naval Institute used a forum contract that they made everybody sign, and it was an all rights. So the publisher, USNI, got all rights to the work, and so they licensed both Hunt for Red October and Flight of the Intruder to Paramount. And Mace Newfield was the producer, and he decided he'd do Hunt for Red October first, which actually worked out pretty good because whenever Flight of the Intruder was ready to hit the theaters, Top Gun had come out. And Top Gun sold a lot of books for me anyway. It's sort of funny, after Flight of the Intruder came out, the Denver Post sent a reporter and he did his story and then he wrote it up. And he said in it that had walked in expecting to meet Tom Cruise, and what he found was Ward Cleaver. And I thought, that's it. Meeting a writer is always a downer for a lot of people. I don't know what they think they're going to get, but naval aviation was that way. I didn't know any Tom Cruise actor types. These were just they were healthy, smart young men, and so they were fun to be around and fun to go on liberty with, and good guys to know. And as you are well aware, the ready rooms can become pretty raucous places, and you're in a society of warriors, and that is a rare experience. And to be accepted as an equal in a society of warriors, that's one of life's great experiences.
And a ready room has a way, to your point about no Tom Cruises, of keeping each other in check.
And if your ego gets out of control, believe me, you got a lot of people who are going to step on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to the movie though. So did they just? I mean, you find out that it's been picked up by Paramount, and then did you have any involvement at all with the creation or the screenplay or the production in any way?
Well, not really. Paramount uh, hired some screenwriters to do a screenplay, and I saw the thing, and the first thing I started reading, and they had Jake Grafton smoking pot. It was his way of rebelling against the stupidities of the Vietnam War. I didn't know anybody that was flying airplanes for a living again in North Vietnam who was out there smoking pot. That'd be just like a Russian roulette. And so I said, you can't do that. Well, I looked at my contract, the Naval Institute contract, and it said that the movie people would do nothing to reduce the value of the characters. Well, in my opinion, that certainly did. And so I really squawked about that. I said, if you do that, I'm going to sue you. Well, they were having other problems. As you recall, the, the military had to cooperate for some of these movies. For example, The Hunt for Red October and Flight of the Intruder. They couldn't have been made without military cooperation. John Lehman was the Secretary of the Navy, and you remember a movie called An Officer and a Gentleman? A manuscript had been submitted to the Navy, and they'd asked for military cooperation, and whoever was running that office at that time said, no, we don't like the way you portray the hero and his girlfriend and all that stuff. So they made that movie up on Whidbey Island at a fort up there. Lehman, when he saw the movie, said, this is nuts. Why didn't we cooperate? And so he talked to the people down there at that office. And so in Flight of the Intruder and Hunt for Red October, the manuscripts came in for the screenplays. They were looked at carefully, and the Navy was going to make them. They invited me to go out and watch some of the filming at Paramount Studios. And the day I was there, they were filming a cockpit sequence. I got the front end of a wrecked A-6, and they were using that for the cockpit scenes, cameras mounted around it, and the actors would sit in there and pretend they were flying. And I found out right quick that making movies is not for me. You watch those actors do the same sequence 12 times or 15 or 20. And, the director says, cut. No, I want to do it again. I want you to look over here. I want a little less emotion, and I want you to look outside or whatever. And they do it again and again and again until the director says, okay, we've got it now. It is boring. It is tough. It's hard work. And my hat's off to the actors who do that for a living.
Listen to you talk about that scene, watching them do the same take dozens of times reminds me of what Heater Heatley said on an episode a couple of years ago. He was one of the extras in Top Gun. He was actually one of the main influences that got that movie made. He was a fighter pilot, active duty at the time. And he was talking specifically about the bar scene where they do the "You've Lost That Loving Feeling," and he said the same thing, that the extras are all like, "Don't we have it already?" Like the 24th take. And he said the actors are acting like it's the first time every time because they don't know which take will be used. And so he said, like you, that's just hard work. There's nothing glamorous about it. Flight of the Intruder, roughly 100,000 words or so. So that's going to be about a 400-page manuscript. A screenplay, every page is a minute of a movie, right? So that's about 120 pages. Got to, you know, crunch it down, and the screenplay writers make choices, and then the directors make choices, and the producers make choices.
The novel has, I believe it's 13 flying scenes in it. The movie is a little less than 2 hours long. And so something had to go. And so there's only three flying missions in the movie.
When did you see it first? Were you invited to the premiere wherever that happened?
Yes, I was. Got to spend some time with Brad Johnson and the BN. It was,
Willem Dafoe.
yeah, Willem Dafoe. I never met Danny Glover, who was the skipper. I thought Willem Dafoe was unbelievably talented.
Well, obviously, he's had quite a career. The same can't be said for Brad Johnson. This was the star maker role, and it just, again, these are the vagaries of the business of movies. You told me once that they paid you to stay away from the set, is the way you put it.
I didn't have much to contribute, and I know Clancy. And when Hunt for Red October came out, he complained bitterly about what they'd done to his novel. And of course, the answer was you got paid for it. If you thought they were going to butcher it, you should have just said, no, you keep your money. I guarantee you, we sold a lot of paperback copies of Flight of the Intruder because people saw the movie and decided to actually sit down and read the book. And it was great for my career.
So every writer has a different process. I never had an outline. I have diagrammed some flying scenes just to keep track of who's where in terms of the composition of a mission. But I'm kind of doing improv where I'll just start with a scene and then go from there, right? And it's like that "Whose Line Is It Anyway" show where Drew Carey will say to the comedians, "Two elephants in a phone booth, go," right? And you go from there. What's your process?
Well, it's very similar to yours. I don't work from an outline. Of course, I would have to tell people for every hour of typing, you better do an hour of thinking. You've got to know what your scene is going to be about, how it's going to fit into the story, who the characters are, and you have what are they going to say? What are they going to do? How am I going to keep moving the plot along? When you've thought all that out, you're ready to type. If you're just sitting there pouring out the words, you're wasting your time. It's not worth anything. And so you have to have a destination in mind. And I always tell people that a story is a journey. You're going to go into the forest and you're going to the place where the main conflict is going to be resolved. That is your destination. And you better figure out what it is before you write word one.
Let's fast forward to how you and I got to know each other. So I, like you, started noodling with the idea of a manuscript when I was actually in my second fighter squadron aboard the Eisenhower, and I had procured a like Gen 1 computer. The screen filled up my desk in my stateroom, and just started, as you know better than I do, it just starts with the sentence, and then the sentence leads to a paragraph, and then that leads to a scene, and you have characters that you put on the stage, and you're like, okay, do I need to know more before this? So that is this actually, did I just write chapter 4 instead of chapter 1? It's an inelegant process, like we're talking about some of these other enterprises. So I got your contact information from, I think, our good friend Fred Rainbow, who's the longtime editor of Proceedings magazine, or he's retired now, but he's a lamplighter. These are the days way before email. And I wrote you from the ship and said, I'm this guy, the oldest story ever told. I'm working on a novel about, a naval aviator. I think I described it as I'm trying to write the anti-techno thriller, like a book that's nothing happens. It's not about the action. It's about the atmospheres.
Right.
And you were absolutely encouraging, welcoming. You gave me the contacts of some of the agents and acquisitions editors at the big houses with the sort of asterisk that you had received 32 rejections. So understand that this is a rejection-based industry. When my first draft was complete, you and I were actually on the phone. I think this is when I was on the faculty at Annapolis at the last tour, my last tour in the late 90s. And we're talking, and you asked me, what's the name of the book? And I said, What Punks Do, right? It was this illusion about the final scene was the XOs petitioning Punk, who's on the fence about staying in or getting out of the Navy. And he says to him, this is what you do, meaning guys like you fly airplanes. You're not salesmen. You're not, whatever. You guys like you do this. And so that's why I called the book What Punks Do. And you said, I'll never forget it. That title sucks. And you just said it, Punk's War. I'm like, oh, okay. That's the title. He goes, yeah, that's a good one. And so just so everybody on the channel knows, that's where the title of my debut novel came from, was that conversation.
I've had 45 books published, and I'd say half of them we've been back and forth about the title with the publisher and my editor and, my agent. Everybody gets into the act.
What was the original title of Flight of the Intruder?
For Each Other.
Right.
And
what's that? So what's that a reference to, though?
Well, what are we fighting for? At least we're fighting for each other, right? And I used that line in the book, and I thought that works. Well, of course, the Naval Institute says this isn't a romance novel. This smacks of something that Harlequin would do, and they came up with Flight of the Intruder. And
so you were gracious enough to come to the release party that we had in May of 2001 at the Naval Academy. And then I joined you by invitation to your deer camp a few years after that, during those years, at the farm you used to have there in Boyer, West Virginia. That world you created there in Boyer with the hunting lodge overlooking the 1,800 acres with a grass strip, and being able to hunt that land for deer during deer season. Those were really special times. Bourbon in front of the hearth at night. If you didn't make the A list to be in the lodge proper, you were in the crew house with a buck stove. Right. So the second year I was in that posse, which was its own form of fun, right? So those were really special times that I remember fondly. But mostly your influence on my writing has been a gift, So again, I want to thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that. One of the things I have on the mantle here in my office was a handwritten letter from Ernest Gahn. And my editor at Doubleday knew that I thought very highly of him, and Doubleday was publishing Mr. Gahn, so he sent him a copy of a novel. I think it was Fly the Intruder, and Mr. Gahn wrote me back, and he says, "If I've had any influence on you, I'm well rewarded."
I was honored when you asked me to write the foreword for the 20th anniversary edition of Flight of the Intruder that was published by the Naval Institute Press in 2006. So thank you for that honor.
Thank you for the foreword. It was excellent. It was perfect.
Stephen, this conversation has been long overdue. One of the fun parts of having this YouTube channel is I get to introduce my audience to people who've been important in my life. And you're right at the top of that list. So thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Ward.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.